You're watching India Today, and Business Today is continuing coverage of the booster shot budget. I'm joined now in the studios by Business Today Television's managing editor Siddharth Zarabi. Udayan Mukherjee, our global business editor, joins us from London. Let me take you through the top 10 takeaways of Nirmala Sitharaman's fourth budget presented in Parliament today. Let's start straight from the top. First, she's been steady and consistent when it comes to taxation. Most importantly, on personal income taxes, which is what a lot of people look out for. No changes in any of the income tax slabs. Number two, income tax returns can be modified within 2 years. And this is useful because very often there may be an oversight which you now have the option of being able to modify. Point number three, government recognizes cryptos in some senses by taxing them. There is no crypto law yet. It was a bit of a chicken and egg situation, but what the government has done is that they will be taxing all transactions on cryptos at 30%. RBI to launch a digital rupee later this year. The government hasn't fully explained the nature of the digital currency. They've defined what all will get covered under crypto taxation, but this is something which hasn't been tried out at a pilot level yet, so we don't know how it will roll out, but the government's announced that there will be a digital rupee this year. The government talks about 60 lakh new jobs being created in 5 years, but the key challenge there is to be able to walk the talk. There will be 5G auctions in this fiscal year. Between April and March next year, there will be 5G auctions with the hope of launching 5G services. 400 new Vande Bharat trains to be introduced in 3 years. One of the other key announcements by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. And in an attempt to try and give a booster dose to electric mobility, incentives for battery swapping and a new policy which really hopefully encourages more people to switch to EVs, and also in the electronic mobility sector, incentives for those companies. And lastly, 68% of defense buying to be from DESI firms in an attempt to push the idea of an Atmanirbhar Bharat when it comes to weapon purchases. Let's take you through also some of the headlines that we're tracking at this hour. Reactions coming in to this union budget. Everyone was looking out for was whether this budget will do enough to try and address the issue of inequality, which has been exacerbated on account of the pandemic, where we've seen the rich getting richer and the poor still struggling to ensure that their requirements are taken care of. Udayan Mukherjee, your thoughts on the issue of inequality and the issue of whether the budget does enough to be able to address this aspect?
This is a key question, Rahul, and I'm frankly grappling with the answer to this at this point in time, because, you know, on one hand, the extra outlay on capex is good, because some part of this capex, like highways and construction and the Awas Yojana, the housing projects, these require labor almost immediately, and they can soak up quite a bit of casual labor and provide some kind of employment. So there will be some employment in some part of the capex spend. But you know, you guys were talking about earlier whether in an election year there could have been or would have been some kind of populism. And if ever one would have supported some kind of populism, it would have been this year, because, you know, it was required this year. So it's a little disappointing and disconcerting to see the scale back in NREGS spends or outlays, the scale back or the stabilization of food subsidies, because I don't think we are there yet in terms of an economy. The bottom end is hurting so much. There is one thing to talk about dialing back RevX, but if you're doing it too soon, then you're probably widening the inequality. The K is going to widen, because at the top end, corporate earnings will grow and the stock market might follow, and therefore earnings will grow at the top. At the bottom, you're removing income support, you're not increasing outlays on many of these welfare schemes, and therefore people will be poorer off. So to answer your question, I think the inequality after this budget is an open question. It may even have grown.
Siddharth, your initial thoughts
Shamika,
on
is a better person to
okay. You have a question for Shamika? Go ahead.
on this as well. No, on this very question on whether she thinks enough has been done at the bottom end of the pyramid, much that there is a lot to be liked about the capex aspect.
Yeah. No, Udayan, I've been following. I think you asked this question a little while back, and Mr. Garg answered it. Frankly, the way you're looking at it, which is the way I think we do as economists, we look at capex and revex, except that when it comes to something like the NREGA or the PM Awas Yojana, These are two very large schemes. And while one falls under capex, the other is really, livelihood support in the form of it's a RevX. It would be nice to see the detail, and I think this is one of those gaps. I would have really liked for her to address that, what is happening vis-a-vis NREGS. I know that the economic survey says there's no, NREGS demand is what it is, but I think frankly, I think what NREGS did for UPA 1 and 2 in terms of popularity, and I have several research papers that show that it had direct impact on poverty across India. I think PM Awas Yojana, while it is capex, but it is having a similar impact on households. But I don't know what the outlay is. I haven't seen the details of the budget yet, and I'd like to see some of that detail. Yeah.
Okay, we want to introduce to this coverage now Sunil Kant Munjal, who joins us on this broadcast. It seems as a long-time tracker of union budgets, Mr. Munjal, Nirmala Sitharaman preferring to be steady, to be predictable, rather than doing something bold, big and dramatic and shaking the boat.
So in a sense, I saw three things in this round. One was the big focus on capital spend, the largest ever increase, at least that I know of, in a year-to-year upping the capex numbers. The challenge, of course, will be creating capacity for efficient execution of these projects and focusing on the outcome. The second one was the interesting focus on digitization in many, many aspects, whether it's a drone policy or the healthcare platform or the Bharat Stack or the registration, common registration across the country. I think these are things, they are little independent things, but when you see the collective impact, it can be quite a big benefit overall for ease of living, ease of use, ease of business, etc. And the third, I think, was this focus on ensuring that the entire logistics chain actually becomes more efficient, because there is a massive multiplier effect. As you know, there are 2 or 3 sectors like the automotive industry, like the real estate, house building, like healthcare, and textile industry, which have a large multiplier on the economy and especially on job creation. Our big challenge still continues to be creating sustainable jobs with sufficient incomes to ensure standard of living of complete families. And I think in a secondary manner, it will happen with this big spend. But some of it, if it was focused directly, potentially could have done better, even introducing a parallel to the rural scheme for the urban poor. I think we could potentially do well with that. A large section of population in the urban areas are still poor. I do like that they're focusing more and more on India becoming more competent, including innovation, R&D for defense, etc., both for small industry, for startups, working with DRDO, etc. So, I mean, it's not, of course, time to go into minor individual line item details. But overall, I think directionally very good. The challenge, of course, will remain of execution, because we've had to scale down even our own targets for monetization as also divestments repeatedly, including for this year, and a lower number for next year.
Okay, Udayan has a question for you. Udayan, go ahead.
Yeah, Sunil, I wanted to ask, having seen this budget, what does it mean for consumption demand from B and C cities, semi-urban areas, even rural areas? Because you deal with these areas. Do you think it will give any kind of fillip, or do you see in the second half of the year demand actually fizzling out in non-urban India as we go forward?
So that's actually, you touched on a very important area. That's one of the challenges which I was trying to figure out, because I've not gone into the full budget document. I've only heard the speech. So it's not clear to me what has been done for specifically, because a large section of population in rural areas has suffered, especially in the last 2 years during the COVID time, and more specifically in the last 2 or 3 quarters. We've seen that. And that is a real risk. So I am hoping that the focus on the spend which will happen on infrastructure, etc., on water, will percolate down to the rural areas and provide the support there, because as you were just saying, infra projects have the benefit of creating jobs right away, even in the short term. But I'm not clear on this, so I don't have a real answer for you. As I said, the challenge is execution. I hope a fair amount of this execution will actually happen in the rural areas to provide that direct booster to incomes.
Siddharth, now this is one of the critical questions. The government's announced a 35% increase in its capital expenditure, which means that they really they're really hoping to up the ante on government spends, but they haven't been able to spend what they'd promised to spend in the last year. So how do you bridge this gap between what the government says it wants to do and what it's actually able to do in terms of execution?
This is a beautiful question, and the simplest answer is, as we have seen from previous budgets and previous actual spending outlays, not all of the outlays spent in that financial year. Remember, on an earlier show we said this government does not do instant coffee budget. This is a medium-term budget, and it started with a 25-year vision. Now, I'll just give you one number. The capital expenditure outlay is a significant increase, but for that to translate into actual money spent will perhaps mean 2 to 3 years. Barring that, and barring the Jal Jeevan Shakti mission, which has seen a 6 times increase in outlay in a matter of 3 years, from 11,000 crore to 60,000 crore, a bit for national education, every other major head is down. If you take Narega, in a 3-year comparison period, from 11.11 lakh crore to 73,000 crore. Kisan Samman is barely 3,000 crore, actually 500 crore more than this year. Urea nutrient subsidy, even they are projected downwards. Food security is projected significantly downwards. So what this overall, the actual fine print of the numbers says, Prime Minister Modi has decided to turn off the tap, not fully, but partially. He has chosen consolidation, which has been his leitmotif and the finance ministry's leitmotif ever since the COVID pandemic began, and this will go to some extent in restoring the fiscal health. There isn't anything directly for consumption, but there are elements for the rural economy which will provide a political economy benefit, Rahul, in the days and weeks and months ahead.
So in some senses, that's not such a bad thing, because rather than being under pressure, Sunil Munjal, of constantly increasing spends on all schemes, because previous finance ministers would feel that pressure, the government here is suggesting, let's pick some priorities. Water, the Jal Mission, having piped water come into people's tap, that's our priority at this moment. We want to enhance roadway capacity, capital expenditure. Let's focus on a few areas, achieve some outcomes there, rather than trying to spray our bullets in different directions and hoping that we get a little bit of a lot of things done.
Actually, I like this approach, by the way. I should also tell you they've gone a step further by, in a sense, almost putting out a hand of friendship to say, let's improve the federal structure, let's work more with the states. Directly talking of replacing the SEZ scheme with a scheme to work with the states, talking of the digital registration and identification of land with the states, talking of an additional interest-free loan to the states over and above the normal drawings they do. So I think the execution has got to be a collective effort, and it can obviously not only be central government, because at the end of the day, the execution has to be on the ground in the states. So I believe directionally and signaling-wise, it is quite good. The only one thing, as I said, is if there was some direct mention of where that direct intervention will take place in the rural areas where people are suffering, would have been clearer, and maybe it is there, as I said, in the details. But overall, there's a little to fault in this budget.
Okay, Saurav Majumdar, for Manrega, the allocation slashed from 98,000 crore rupees in this year to 73,000 crore rupees in next year. Fertilizer subsidy down from 1,40,000 crore rupees currently to 1,05,000 crore rupees. Food subsidy down from 2 lakh crore versus 2.4 lakh crore. Petroleum subsidy down as well from 6,517 crores to 5,813 crores. So a lot of cuts. This is not something typically we tend to see from governments who feel pressured to increase allocations. Here, the government is taking some hard calls on where they want to spend their money. Saurav?
Absolutely, Rahul. If you see the bulk of the expenditure and if you see the kind of breakup which has been provided even in the budget papers, if you see the bulk is in the transport sector, rural development and urban development, education and allied. So these are the areas which have gone up, especially the transport sector, where the road and highways and the building of highways has had a very, some say it's a very ambitious target which the budget has set out. So I think there is a definite shift in terms of where the government wants the expenditure to go, and capital expenditure, which probably is looking at again to come back to the central theme of the budget and earlier budgets of creating as much multiplier effect as possible in terms of employment and jobs. And this is again the hope. The execution will be the key, but that is the element which I think gets underscored in this. We will have to keep a very close watch on how much is actually spent vis-a-vis the amount of money which is being allocated in the budget itself.
Let's spend a moment talking about defense, where on the one side the government is trying to focus on the idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat, ensuring that money is available for R&D in the defense sector, announcing that 2/3 of the purchases that will be made internally, and this has a huge effect given how big an arms purchaser India is, Udayan. This not immediately but over a period of time has a massive impact on job creation and on production of these sophisticated weapon systems within India.
Yeah, Rahul, I think this is an important point because, we were talking about job creation, and if you look at what they're trying to do, the defense budgets over the years have not gone up significantly. But within the defense budget, the capital spending for capital equipment has actually been going up. The last couple of years, I think it's gone up from 95,000 crores to 1,35,000 crores. And the estimates are that in the next 3 years, the way it's going, it could go up to 2 lakh crores of capital spending. On the other hand, pensions and wages and these kinds of things have not grown. So the defense budget is probably in one place, but within that, capital equipment has gone up. And out of that, as you said, 68% of all procurement will now happen from local industries. So you can imagine of a budget of say 1.5 lakh crores of capital equipment sourcing, 68%, which is 1 lakh crores, will happen from domestic industries, and how much of a multiplier effect it will have on domestic defense companies, and therefore they need to hire more people and set up or commission more capacities. So I think this is a very interesting way of stimulating the defense sector in India, which will lead to some kind of job creation. So some of these things are actually quite good. The kind of ambitious road construction target, the stimulation of domestic indigenized capital good manufacturing in defense, the PLI schemes which have been extended to other areas like solar modules to the extent of 19,500 crores in this current budget. These are all job creating moves. My only issue with this budget, as I've been saying repeatedly, is that you are stimulating, you're turning the capex tap on, but did you have to switch off the revex tap quite so soon, given that there is so much stress at the lower end of the pyramid? And I think I hope this does not turn out to be one of those hasty kind of retreats from revenue expenditure, which will come back to bite the government. So some amount of scale down of food subsidies and fertilizer subsidies, given that last year, because of the calamity, because of the pandemic, we had to spend much more on food grain distribution than in a normal year. So some part of scale back is understandable. But I think scheme after scheme, the way outlays have been moderated, I think it's too hasty a retreat from revenue expenditure, which might have ramifications for the lower end of the pyramid income situation, which is quite bad in any case.
Shankar Iyer, the government's announced a 35% increase in capital expenditure. Is this an announcement that you think the government will be able to live up to? It's one of the things that becomes a big headline on budget day, but ultimately when you read the fine print much later, you discover that the government fell way short of being able to achieve that target.
It's a possibility that they might build. It's a possibility. I mean, nobody expected India to build over 30 kilometers per day. I mean, so taking a target like this is very interesting. But the larger political question, I said that, the economic need, the needs of the economy and the needs of the government or the political party were perfectly aligned to do many things, and they have been chosen to be fiscally conservative. Now, you could argue that they are promoting the idea of empowerment versus entitlement, that they will win elections by provision of permanent assets instead of temporary income. So you get water connection, you get Ujjwala, the whole works. But the final test, Rahul, will be whether they are able to pump up the private final consumption expenditure. And that will depend on one aspect that will count here is how soon the economy opens up. Second aspect is how the contact sectors contribute to the final consumption expenditure. It's a bet. All budgets are a bet. And this is an interesting bet that this government has taken, in that they are willing to pay a price pay a price in court of what criticism they might face, particularly in the run-up to the elections, is interesting.
Okay.
They might have explanations. I'm sure Nirmala Sitharaman will have some explanations, and I'm sure Prime Minister Modi will have some thought process on this.
One of the explanations, Shankar, just to take that point quickly forward, is 1 lakh crore interest-free loan to the states, which also tells you that the central government wants to shift some of the burden of execution of Gati Shakti or the Jal mission at the state level to the states also, Shankar.
Yeah, they're buying the support of the states to make Gati Shakti happen, because Gati Shakti is entirely in the state's domain. I mean, the central government is, as N.T. Ramarao once said, is a conceptual myth. So all of this stuff has to be done in the states, and they are buying the support of the state. In fact, the land registration thing, which I personally think is a very interesting idea and much needed, will also depend on how the states cooperate.
Right.
Transliteration across 8 scheduled languages is amazing.
Right.
So there are a lot of pieces in this. If you think of it it's like this central wheel, the spy wheel, like a timing case of an engine. So, there's a big wheel and there are the smaller wheels working. We don't know
Rahul, I think,
how it will translate in consumption.
I think to take that analogy forward, if it's a wheel and there's a tire, it's been inflated to some extent. I suspect, like we saw last year, there might be midterm course corrections, for example, on fertilizer prices, the way the overall crude situation is evolving. So let's perhaps see that the government has announced intent of being fiscally conservative. It's kind of sent positive signals overseas to the bond markets to some extent, but we don't know what will happen 3 months, 6 months later if some of the underlying assumptions change significantly.
Okay, we'll slip into a very quick break. We've got reactions coming in from corporate India. We've got reactions coming in from economists, some very sharp insights here on India Today and Business Today's coverage of the booster budget. More details on the other side. Stay with us. We're back in a moment.